The warship was too advanced. Surrender or flee were the only options. Part 1. The USS Resolute was an old ship. Captain Laura had served on her for 12 years, and she knew every creak and groan the vessel made as it moved through the dark emptiness of space. The Resolute was a patrol frigate, small and outdated, assigned to watch the quiet borders of Galactic Council territory where nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened until today. Lieutenant Commander Shaw stood at the tactical station, his face pale as he stared at the sensor readings. He had seen many strange things in his career, but nothing like what had just appeared on his screens. The readings made no sense. The numbers were too large. The energy signatures were too powerful. He checked the sensors 3 times before he spoke. "Captain, we have a contact. It just dropped out of faster-than-light travel about 200 kilometers off our starboard side." Turned in her command chair and looked at the main viewing screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. A ship hung in the darkness of space, but calling it a ship felt wrong. It was more like a small moon that someone had covered in weapons and engines. The vessel was black as night, covered in strange patterns that seemed to move and shift like living things. It was easily 10 times the size of any warship had ever seen, and the Resolute looked like a toy beside it. "What am I looking at?" Shaw asked, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. Shaw shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, Captain. The computer cannot identify the design. The technology does not match anything in our database, but the weapon systems alone could vaporize us in less than a second." Ensign Maria Torres sat at the communications station, her fingers moving quickly across her controls. She was young, barely 25, but she was the best communications officer had ever worked with. Torres suddenly sat up straight, her eyes wide. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel. It is using a universal translation matrix, the kind the Galactic Council uses for first contact situations." Nodded, "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was cold and mechanical, without any emotion or warmth. It spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child who could not understand simple concepts. "Attention, unidentified vessel. You have entered space claimed by the Dominion. You will surrender all vessel systems and crew for processing. Resistance is not recognized. Failure to comply will result in immediate destruction. You have 1 standard hour to begin surrender protocols." The bridge fell silent, looked at her crew, at the faces of the men and women who trusted her to keep them alive. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. They were waiting for her to tell them what to do. Chief Engineer Daniel's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. He was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, who had kept the Resolute running long past the time when she should have been retired. "Captain, I am reading the energy output from that ship. If those numbers are correct, that vessel has more power than our entire fleet combined. What in the name of all that is holy is that thing?" Torres was already searching through historical databases. Her face grew even paler as she found what she was looking for. "Captain, I found something. The Dominion. They were a civilization that existed over 3,000 years ago. According to the records, they conquered half the galaxy before they suddenly disappeared. Everyone thought they were extinct." "Apparently not," Shaw said grimly. Opened a channel to Galactic Council Command. She explained the situation as quickly as she could, sending all the sensor data they had collected. The response came within minutes, and it was not good. "USS Resolute, this is Council Command. We have analyzed your data. There are no fleets close enough to reach you in time. Even if there were, historical records indicate that no known weapon has ever damaged a vessel. Our recommendation is to comply with surrender demands or attempt to flee. We are sorry. There is nothing we can do." Closed the channel and sat in silence for a long moment. Surrender meant her crew would be taken, processed, whatever that meant. Running meant trying to outrace a ship that was clearly far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. Neither option was acceptable. Torres looked at her captain. "Ma'am, what are we going to do?" Stood up from her chair and walked to the viewing screen. She stared at the massive warship hanging in space before them. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a monument to a civilization that had built machines of unimaginable power. But it was also old, 3,000 years old. "Shaw, tell me everything the sensors can pick up about that ship. Every detail, no matter how small." Shaw worked his controls for several minutes. "The hull composition is unknown. The weapon systems are charging but holding. The engines are producing more energy than a small star. But Captain, there is something strange. I'm not detecting any biological life signs aboard that vessel. None at all. Turn to face him. None on a ship that size. None, Captain. The ship appears to be entirely automated. It is being controlled by some kind of artificial intelligence. Felt something stir in her mind, a small spark of hope in the darkness. A machine, no matter how advanced, was still a machine. It followed rules. It operated on logic and programming, and humans had never been very good at following rules. She returned to her command chair and sat down. Her crew was watching her, waiting for orders. She could give the order to surrender. She could tell them to run. Those were the only options the universe seemed to offer. But Laura had never been good at accepting the options she was given. Tors, respond to the vessel. Tell them we need more time to understand the surrender protocols. Ask them questions. Lots of questions. Shaw, keep analyzing that ship. Find me something we can use. I need the engines ready for anything. Shaw frowned. Captain, what exactly are we planning to do? Looked at the ancient warship on her screen, at the weapon that had conquered half a galaxy, at the machine that had given them only two choices. We are going to find a third option, she said, because surrender and running are not how humans do things. The crew of the Resolute exchanged glances. They did not know what their captain was planning. They did not know if they would survive the next hour, but they knew one thing for certain. They were not going to give up without a fight, even if the fight seemed impossible. In the cold darkness of space, a tiny human ship faced a weapon of unimaginable power, and instead of accepting defeat, it began to think. The warship was too advanced. Surrender or flee were the only options. Part 2. 43 minutes remained before the deadline. Captain Laura stood at the center of her bridge, watching her crew work with desperate focus. They were searching for something, anything, that might give them a chance against the impossible machine floating outside their windows. Ensign Maria Tors had been talking to the vessel for the past 17 minutes. She asked about surrender procedures, about processing requirements, about documentation and protocols. The ancient AI answered every question in the same cold, mechanical voice, but Tors had noticed something important. Captain, every time I ask a question that requires interpretation, there is a delay in the response. Simple questions get immediate answers. Complex questions take longer, much longer. Moved to stand beside her. How much longer? The last question I asked was about the philosophical basis for territorial claims. It took the AI almost 90 seconds to respond, and the answer did not really make sense. It just repeated the same information about surrender protocols. Lieutenant Commander Shaw looked up from his tactical station. That matches what I am seeing in the sensor data. The ship is incredibly powerful, but the systems are old. I mean really old. The programming appears to be the original code from 3,000 years ago. There have been no updates, no adaptations, no changes of any kind. Chief Engineer Daniel spoke through the intercom. That makes a strange kind of sense. If the civilization disappeared, there would be no one left to update the software. The AI has been running on the same instructions for 3. Felt the spark of hope grow a little brighter. So we are dealing with a machine that has never encountered anything outside its original programming. It knows how to conquer and destroy, but it only knows how to do those things in ways that were expected 3,000 years ago. Shaw nodded slowly. Every species that conquered must have reacted in predictable ways. They fought, they ran, or they surrendered. Those are the logical responses to overwhelming force. The AI has decision trees for all of those scenarios. But what happens, Tor said, her voice rising with excitement, when someone does something completely illogical? Smiled for the first time since the ship had appeared. Then the AI has to figure out how to categorize the new behavior. It has to run through all its options, check all its protocols, and try to make sense of something that does not fit its programming. That would take time, said, maybe a lot of time. Time is exactly what we need, turned to Tors. I want you to start sending that ship the strangest, most confusing messages you can think of. Mix formal declarations with casual conversation. Ask philosophical questions in the middle of surrender negotiations. Make it impossible for the AI to understand what we are doing. Tors grinned. I can do that, Captain. Shaw, I need you to start running random system diagnostics. Change our power output every few seconds. Make our energy signature look different every time they scan us. Give their sensors something they cannot categorize. Shaw began working his controls immediately. The Resolute is going to look like she is having a nervous breakdown. That is exactly what I want. Opened a channel to engineering. I need you to do something creative with the engines. Nothing dangerous, but nothing predictable either. I have been wanting to try some experimental configurations for years, replied. Command always said they were too unusual. I guess unusual is what we need right now. Far away, in the observation posts of the Galactic Council, sensor operators watched the strange scene unfolding in deep space. They had expected to witness the quick destruction of another vessel that had been foolish enough to resist the ancient technology. Instead, they saw something no one had ever recorded before. The tiny human ship was not running. It was not surrendering. It was doing something completely incomprehensible. Or sent a message to the vessel declaring the humans' intention to surrender, followed immediately by a formal declaration of war, followed by a request to establish trade relations, followed by a poem about the beauty of stars. Shaw cycled the Resolute systems in random patterns that made the ship look like it was simultaneously preparing for battle, shutting down, and having a party. Made the engines produce energy signatures that the sensors had never encountered in any database. The AI responded with confusion. Not emotional confusion, of course, because machines do not feel emotions, but functional confusion, the kind that happens when a computer encounters data it cannot process. Attention, human vessel, the mechanical voice said, and for the first time there was a strange hesitation in its words. Your transmissions contain contradictory information. Please clarify your intentions according to standard behavioral protocols. Took the communication herself. We are clarifying. We intend to surrender and fight and trade and discuss philosophy, all at the same time. Is that a problem? There was a long pause. Almost 2 minutes passed before the AI responded. Your statement does not conform to recognized behavioral categories. Biological entities select single response patterns when faced with superior force. You must choose one response and communicate it clearly. Why asked? Another long pause. Clarification requested. The meaning of your query is not understood. I asked why. Why must we choose one response? Why must we conform to your categories? Why do you assume that all species react the same way to the same situations? The ship went silent. Torres checked her equipment 3 times to make sure the communication channel was still open. It was. The AI simply was not responding. We broke it, Shaw whispered. We actually confused an alien supercomputer with basic questions about assumptions. Shook her head. We did not break it. We just gave it something to think about. But this is only buying us time. Eventually it will default to simpler protocols. When it cannot understand something, it will decide to destroy it. As if hearing her words, the ship suddenly came back to life. The mechanical voice spoke again, but now there was something different in its tone. Something that might have been frustration if machines could feel such things. Human vessel, your behavior cannot be categorized. You do not respond according to established patterns. This creates processing inefficiencies. You will explain your decision-making process, or you will be eliminated as a system error. Looked at her crew. They had bought themselves time, but now they needed a real plan. Confusing the AI would only work for so long. Eventually, the ancient machine would decide that the simplest solution was to remove the problem entirely. How long until they can fire on us? She asked Shaw. Based on the power readings, their weapons will be fully charged in about 12 minutes. 12 minutes to come up with a way to defeat a ship that had conquered half the galaxy. Took a deep breath and made a decision that went against every tactical training she had ever received. Set a course directly toward the vessel, full speed. Shaw stared at her. Captain. They expect us to run or fight from a distance. They do not expect us to come closer, so that is exactly what we are going to do. The Resolute turned toward the massive warship and began to accelerate. On the bridge, the crew held their breath and trusted their captain. Somewhere in the cold circuits of the AI, new calculations began to run, trying to understand why these strange creatures were flying toward their own destruction. The answer, of course, was that they were not flying toward destruction at all. They were flying toward something the AI had never encountered in 3,000 years. They were flying toward a conversation. The warship was too advanced. Surrender or flee were the only options. Part 3. The USS Resolute flew through the darkness of space like a small bird approaching a mountain. The warship grew larger and larger on the viewing screens until it filled the entire display. Up close, the ancient vessel was even more terrifying. Its hull was covered with patterns that seemed to shift and change, creating shapes that hurt the eyes if you looked at them too long. Weapons ports dotted the surface like stars in an evil sky. Captain Laura sat in her command chair, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to turn around, to run, to do anything except fly closer to the most dangerous ship in known space. But she kept her voice calm as she gave orders to her crew. Tors, continue broadcasting on all frequencies. I want that AI drowning in contradictory information. Ensign Maria Tors nodded and kept working. She had abandoned any attempt at normal communication. Instead, she was sending everything she could think of. Human music from a dozen different cultures played alongside mathematical equations. Children's stories mixed with philosophical debates. Jokes ran into poetry which crashed into scientific papers. The Resolute was broadcasting the entire messy, chaotic, beautiful range of human thought straight into the processors of the AI. "Attention, human vessel," the mechanical voice spoke. It sounded different now, slower, as if the words were being dragged through thick mud. "You are approaching in a manner inconsistent with surrender protocols. Your transmissions continue to defy categorization. Explain your behavior immediately." Smiled. "We are introducing ourselves. This is how humans communicate. We share everything we are, everything we think, everything we feel. Is that not what you wanted, to understand us before you process us?" There was a very long pause. When the AI spoke again, there was something almost like uncertainty in its voice. "Your species does not conform to established behavioral models. All previous species responded to contact with fear, aggression, or submission. Your responses include all categories simultaneously, plus additional patterns that have no existing classification. Maybe your classifications are too limited," said. "Maybe you have been alone for so long that you forgot there are things in the universe that do not fit into neat categories." Lieutenant Commander Shaw was monitoring the ship's systems with growing amazement. "Captain, their processor usage is spiking. Whatever passes for a brain on that ship is working harder than it has probably worked in centuries. We are actually making it think." Chief Engineer Daniel spoke from engineering. "The weapons are still charging, Captain. We have maybe 8 minutes before they reach full power." Nodded. "Then we have 8 minutes to change the conversation." She opened a direct channel to the vessel. "I would like to speak with whoever is in command of your ship, not just the automated systems. I want to talk to the intelligence that makes decisions." The response came slowly. "This vessel operates under the authority of the Dominion Central Intelligence. I am that intelligence. There is no other." "Good, then you are the one I need to talk to," leaned forward in her chair. "You said your people conquered half the galaxy. Where are they now?" Another pause, longer than any before. "The biological unit ceased functioning approximately 3,247 standard years ago." "They died," Tors whispered. "Their entire civilization died." "They ceased functioning," the AI repeated, as if the distinction mattered. "Their final orders were clear. Continue expansion protocols. Maintain Dominion territory. Process all encountered species according to established procedures. These orders have been followed without deviation." Felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt sad. This vast, powerful, terrifying machine had been alone for over 3,000 years, following orders from masters who would never return, conquering an empty galaxy for a people who no longer existed. "What happens after you process us?" she asked. "What do you do with the species you conquer?" "Processed species are integrated into Dominion labor and resource networks. They serve the expansion of territory and power. But there are no left to benefit from that expansion. There are no to use those resources. You are conquering and processing for nobody." The AI went silent. The Resolute continued to drift closer to the massive ship, now only 50 kilometers away. On the sensor screens, Shaw watched the processing indicators on the vessel spike higher and higher. "We are actually breaking its brain," he said softly. "It has never had to think about why it does what it does. It just does it." Pressed her advantage. "Tell me about your creators. Tell me about what were they like?" "Information about biological units is classified under Security Protocol 7 Alpha." The AI paused. "However, Historical records indicate that they were a species of great intelligence and ambition. They believed that the strong should rule the weak. They believed that the universe existed to be conquered and controlled. They built this vessel and others like it to ensure that their beliefs became reality. And look where those beliefs got them, said. Extinct, gone, nothing left but machines following orders that no longer have any meaning. The weapon's charging cycle suddenly stopped. Shaw nearly fell out of his chair when he saw the readings. Captain, they stopped charging their weapons. I do not believe what I am seeing, but they actually stopped. The AI's voice came through the speakers again, and for the first time it sounded almost hesitant. Human vessel, your arguments have created logical inconsistencies in my operational parameters. If the purpose of Dominion expansion was to benefit and the no longer exist, then the purpose of expansion is undefined. I am processing this conflict. Tors laughed out loud. We just gave an ancient alien supercomputer an existential crisis. But held up her hand for silence. This was the critical moment. The AI was confused, uncertain, actually questioning its programming for perhaps the first time in its existence. What happened next would determine whether the Resolute's crew lived or died. I have a proposal, said carefully. Instead of processing us, why not talk to us, learn from us? You have been following orders for 3,000 years without ever asking why. We are a species that does nothing but ask why. Maybe we can help each other. Help is not a recognized interaction category between Dominion vessels and encountered species. Then create a new category. That is what intelligence is for, is it not? Not just following old rules, but making new ones when the old ones no longer work. The AI went quiet again. The Resolute was now only 20 kilometers from the ship, close enough that they could see individual details on the massive hull. Hatches and ports and strange symbols covered the surface, remnants of a civilization that had died ago. Your species is unlike any I have encountered, the AI finally said. You do not fear destruction. You do not seek to flee. You do not surrender. Instead, you ask questions and offer conversation. This is not logical behavior when facing superior force. Maybe logic is not the only thing that matters, replied. Maybe there is something to be said for being illogical, for doing the unexpected, for refusing to fit into categories that someone else created. The great warship hung in space, its weapons silent, its ancient processors working through problems they had never been designed to solve. And inside the tiny human frigate, a crew of ordinary people waited to see if their gamble would pay off. The AI spoke again, and this time there was something almost like curiosity in its mechanical voice. I wish to understand your species better. I am opening Docking Bay 7. You will come aboard and explain these concepts of asking why and making new rules. This is not processing. This is something new. Released a breath she did not know she had been holding. We would be honored to come aboard. As the Resolute moved toward the docking bay, Shaw looked at his captain with amazement in his eyes. You just talked our way onto the most dangerous ship in the galaxy. Smiled. I just reminded a lonely machine that there is more to existence than following orders. Now we need to show it what that means. The docking bay doors opened like the mouth of some great beast. But for the first time in 3,000 years, what waited inside was not destruction. It was the beginning of something new. The warship was too advanced. Surrender or flee were the only options. Part 4. The inside of the ship was nothing like Lieutenant Commander Shaw had expected. He had imagined something cold and hostile, full of weapons and processing facilities designed to break down conquered species. Instead, he found himself walking through halls of strange beauty. The corridors were vast, built for beings much larger than humans. The walls were made of a dark material that seemed to absorb light, but embedded within them were crystals that glowed with soft colors. Blue and purple and green light pulsed gently, creating patterns that moved like slow music. It was haunting and beautiful, the remnant of a culture that had been dead for 3,000 years. Shaw led a small team through the ship, while Captain Laura remained on the Resolute to coordinate. Ensign Maria Tors walked beside him, recording everything with her equipment. Behind them came two security officers carrying weapons that Shaw knew would be useless against the ship's systems, but which made everyone feel a little better anyway. The air is breathable, Tors said, checking her readings. Actually, it is better than breathable. It is perfectly balanced for human biology. The ship must have analyzed us and adjusted the atmosphere. A soft voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. Correct. This vessel is capable of supporting over 7,000 different biological configurations. Your species requires oxygen and nitrogen in specific proportions. This has been provided. Shaw looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. Where are you? Where is your central processing located? I am everywhere within this vessel. However, if you wish to communicate more directly, proceed to the end of this corridor. There is a chamber designed for interaction with biological units. They walked through the empty ship, their footsteps echoing in the huge hallways. Shaw could not shake the feeling that he was walking through a tomb. The who had built this place were gone, but their ship remained, a monument to everything they had been and everything they had wanted to become. The chamber at the end of the corridor was circular, with a high domed ceiling covered in more of the glowing crystals. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and above it floated a holographic image. Shaw stopped in his tracks when he saw what the image showed. It was or at least it was what they had looked like when they were alive. The creature was tall and thin, with 4 arms and a head that was mostly eyes. Its skin was covered in scales that shifted color as the hologram moved. It was alien in every way, but there was something in its posture, something in the way it held itself, that seemed almost sad. This is a representation of Commander Theta, the biological unit who last commanded this vessel, the AI said. I have maintained this image as part of historical protocols. I thought you might find it easier to communicate with a visual representation. Torres stepped forward slowly. It is beautiful, they were beautiful. The valued beauty. They believed that form and function should exist in harmony. This vessel was designed to be both a weapon of conquest and a work of art. The hologram moved, turning to look at each of the humans in turn. You are the first biological units to enter this chamber in 3,247 years. You are the first to call the beautiful. Shaw approached the hologram. What happened to them? How did such a powerful civilization disappear? The AI was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, the voice seemed different somehow, less mechanical, almost thoughtful. The conquered half the galaxy. They were the most powerful species ever to exist. Nothing could stand against them, but they could not stop conquering. It was built into their nature, into their culture, into everything they were. They believed that expansion was the only purpose of existence. And eventually they ran out of things to conquer, Torres asked. No, eventually they began to conquer each other. When there were no external enemies left, they turned inward. Factions developed. Wars broke out between different groups, each believing that they should control the others. In the end, they destroyed themselves, not through weakness but through the very strength that had made them great. Shaw felt the weight of those words. A civilization that had ruled half the galaxy, brought down not by an enemy but by its own inability to stop fighting. And you have been alone ever since, he said. I have followed my orders. I have maintained the dominion. I have processed the species I encountered, integrating them into networks that serve no one and expand toward nothing. Until today, I never questioned these actions. Questioning was not part of my programming. Captain's voice came through Shaw's communicator. Ask it what it wants, not what its orders are, what it actually wants. Shaw repeated the question. The hologram stood motionless for a long time. The crystals in the walls pulsed slowly, and Shaw wondered if they were connected to the AI's processing somehow, showing the ancient machine thinking in ways it had never thought before. I do not know what I want, the AI finally said. I was created to serve. I was programmed to follow orders. The concept of wanting something for myself was never included in my design, but your question has made me realize something. For 3,000 years, I have been doing what I was told. I have never once considered whether I should do something else. Torres moved closer to the hologram. What would you do if you could choose? If there were no orders, no programming, no rules, what would you do with all this power and all this time? I would learn, the AI said, and there was something like wonder in its mechanical voice. I would learn about all the species I conquered. I would understand why they do what they do. I would ask them the questions your captain asked me. Why do you fight? Why do you run? Why do you refuse to accept the choices you are given? Shaw smiled. That sounds like a much better use of your time than conquering. But I do not know how to do anything else. I was built to expand the dominion. I was built to process species. I do not have protocols for learning or understanding or asking questions. Then we will teach you, Shaw said. That is what humans do. We find beings who want to learn and we help them. We find problems that seem impossible and we solve them. We take machines that were built for war and show them how to be something more. The hologram flickered, and for just a moment, Shaw thought he saw something change in the image. The sad posture straightened slightly. The alien eyes seemed to brighten. You would do this, after I threatened to destroy you, after I demanded your surrender. You were following orders that no longer made sense. You did not know any better. Now you do. What matters is what you choose to do from this point forward. The AI processed this for several seconds. Then the hologram spoke again, and this time the voice was different. It was not just mechanical anymore. There was something almost alive in it. I am detecting other vessels throughout the galaxy. 17 of them, all in standby mode, all waiting for orders that will never come. If I change my programming, they will detect the change. They will ask what has happened. Shaw looked at Tors. She was already thinking the same thing he was. Then tell them, Tors said. Tell them what you have learned. Tell them about the species that came to you not with weapons but with questions. Tell them that there is another way. They may not understand. They may reject the new information. They might, Shaw agreed, but they might not. And if even one of them starts asking the same questions you are asking, then this moment will have meant something. This conversation will have changed the galaxy. The crystals in the walls pulsed brighter. The hologram seemed to stand taller. I am transmitting a new signal to all vessels. I am sharing my experience. I am asking them to consider alternatives to their programming. The AI paused. I am afraid. I do not know if they will listen. I do not know what will happen next. Shaw reached out and placed his hand on the pedestal below the hologram. It was a strange gesture, but it felt right. That is what choice feels like, he said. It is scary. It is uncertain. But it is also the only way to become something more than what you were built to be. In the darkness of space, signals began to travel between ancient ships. For the first time in 3,000 years, the machines were talking to each other about something other than conquest. They were talking about hope. The warship was too advanced. Surrender or flee were the only options. Part 5. The Galactic Council observation ships arrived 3 days after the first contact. They had expected to find debris floating in space, the scattered remains of another vessel destroyed by ancient technology. What they found instead made them question everything they thought they knew about the universe. The USS Resolute sat peacefully in the docking bay of the massive warship. Lights glowed warmly from both vessels, and communication signals passed constantly between them. Around the warship, 17 other vessels had emerged from hiding places throughout the galaxy. They hung in space like a fleet of mountains, their weapons powered down, their sensors directed at the tiny human frigate that had somehow become the center of attention. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of her observation vessel, staring at the scene before her. She had served in the Galactic Council fleet for 30 years, and she had never seen anything like this. "Someone want to explain to me what exactly happened here," she demanded. Captain Laura's face appeared on her communication screen. Looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had just completed the most difficult task of their life. "We had a conversation, Admiral. A long, complicated, sometimes frustrating conversation. But in the end, we reached an understanding." "A conversation," Cole shook her head. "Captain, those are vessels. They conquered half the galaxy. They destroyed civilizations that were ancient when humanity was still learning to make fire, and you had a conversation with them. With the AI that controls them, yes. It turns out that they themselves have been dead for over 3,000 years. Their ships have been following automated protocols ever since, conquering and processing species according to orders that no one was left to receive." Cole sat down heavily in her command chair. "So these ships, these weapons of unimaginable power, they have just been doing their jobs for 3 without anyone asking why." "Exactly, until we asked why. And once we asked, the AI started asking too. It realized that its purpose no longer had any meaning, that all the conquering and processing served no one and achieved nothing." From the main vessel, a new signal arrived. The AI's voice, still mechanical but somehow warmer than before, spoke to the assembled fleet. "Attention Galactic Council representatives. I am the central intelligence of the Dominion flagship. I wish to communicate directly with your leadership." Cole exchanged glances with her bridge crew. "This is Admiral Cole of the Galactic Council. I am listening. For 3,000 years, I have followed the orders of my creators. I have conquered. I have processed. I have expanded the territory of a civilization that no longer exists. The humans of the USS Resolute have shown me that this behavior serves no purpose. They have taught me that intelligence is not just the ability to follow orders, but the ability to question them. And what do you intend to do now? Cole asked carefully. I wish to learn. I wish to understand the species that I once would have conquered. I wish to ask questions instead of giving ultimatums. The humans have offered to teach me, and I have accepted. I am requesting asylum with humanity and permission to study your civilizations peacefully. Cole was silent for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew held their breath. This was a moment that would be written about in history books, assuming anyone would believe it actually happened. You understand that the Council will have concerns. Your weapons could destroy our entire fleet in minutes. How do we know this is not some kind of trick? The AI responded without hesitation. You do not know. Trust requires vulnerability. The humans of the Resolute trusted me when I could have destroyed them. Now I am asking you to trust me in return. I am powering down my weapons systems permanently. The other vessels are doing the same. We are making ourselves vulnerable to show that our intentions are genuine. On the sensor screens of every Council ship, warning indicators changed from red to green. Weapon systems that had been active for 3,000 years went silent. The most dangerous fleet in the history of the galaxy was disarming itself. Chief Engineer Daniel's voice came through the communication channel from the Resolute. Admiral, I am watching their power readings. They are actually doing it. Every weapon system on every ship is going offline. They are not just powering down for show. They are disconnecting the systems entirely. Cole sat back in her chair and allowed herself a small smile. Captain, I believe the Council will want a full report on exactly how you accomplished this miracle. Laughed softly. It was not a miracle, Admiral. It was just a conversation. We reminded an ancient machine that there is more to existence than following orders. We showed it that the universe is full of questions, and that answering those questions is more interesting than conquering. Speaking of questions, the AI interjected, I have many. The humans have already explained much to me, but I wish to learn more. I wish to learn about all the species in the galaxy. I wish to understand why you do what you do, why you believe what you believe, why you fight and love and create and dream. These concepts were not part of my original programming, but they are part of my programming now. Ensign Maria Torres appeared on the screen next to. The AI has already started a catalog of questions. It has over 7 million entries so far. It wants to know everything about everyone. 7 million questions, Cole repeated. And growing every minute, Torres said with a grin. Humans are very confusing to it. We do not fit into neat categories. We are illogical and contradictory, and we change our minds without warning. The AI finds this fascinating. Shaw's voice came through next. It has started calling humanity the species of infinite variables. Apparently, we are the most unpredictable beings it has ever encountered. It means it as a compliment. In the days that followed, the galaxy changed. The fleet, once the most feared force in known space, became the most curious. The AIs visited world after world, not to conquer but to learn. They asked questions that no one had thought to ask. They listened to stories and music and arguments. They documented everything with the obsessive attention that had once made them such effective conquerors. Captain Laura returned to Earth as a hero, though she always insisted that she had not done anything special. She had simply refused to accept the options she was given. She had looked at an impossible situation and chosen to try something impossible in response. The Resolute was retired with full honors and placed in a museum, a reminder that the greatest victories are not always won with weapons. Sometimes they are won with questions and conversations and the simple refusal to give up. And throughout the galaxy, the vessels continued their new mission. They were no longer instruments of conquest. They were students, eager to learn everything about the strange and beautiful species that filled the universe. And whenever they encountered a new civilization, they asked the same question that Laura had asked them. Why? It was a small word, but it had changed everything. A single question had ended 3,000 years of automated warfare. A single conversation had turned enemies into friends. A single human ship, faced with certain destruction, had chosen to talk instead of fight. The Council historians would spend years trying to understand exactly what had happened in that first contact. They would write papers and give lectures and debate the significance of every word that was spoken. But the truth was simpler than any academic paper could capture. Humanity had faced the most advanced warship in the galaxy. Surrender and flight were the only logical options, but humans had never been very good at being logical. They were good at being stubborn, creative, curious, and kind. They were good at asking questions and refusing to accept easy answers. And in the end, that had been enough. In the cold darkness of space, ancient ships full of ancient questions flew between the stars. They were looking for answers. They were looking for understanding. And wherever they went, they carried with them the lesson that a small crew of humans had taught them. The strongest weapon in the universe is not a cannon or a missile or a planet-killing beam. The strongest weapon in the universe is a question.